So today we have Mr. Anthony Noto, a 1991 grad of West Point, also a grad of University of Chicago, as well as Wharton. He started his career off in the Army as a signal officer who went to Ranger School. Following that, he went and joined Kraft Foods, then went to Morgan Stanley, where he eventually became a partner, was a CFO of the NFL, was a CFO and CEO of Twitter, and now he leads SoFi as the CEO. Sir, it's an honor to have you here today and to pick your brain. You are personally a big hero of mine and someone that I look up to. So it's an absolute honor to have you here today.
Well, Max, thanks for having me. It's an honor for me to be on.
So first and foremost, I became a big fan of yours actually following prep school beast. So after summer training, started summer ball at USMAPS, and I learned a little bit about you and kind of your upbringing, and really related to me. I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles without a lot of money, and I found football as an outlet, and my mom, similar to you, really worked hard to put me in a better position, and eventually I was able to kind of climb out of where I was and eventually get recruited by West Point, not because I was a great athlete, but because, again, I was surrounded by a lot of great athletes and a lot of great people that pushed me, and eventually was able to get to West Point, not because I didn't know anything about the Army, but because, similar to you, I knew that this was a great leadership institution and a place where you could play football, but also you could develop as a person. And that was something that I found so appealing. And when I heard about you, I mean, obviously I was very passionate about leadership and became passionate about military and business. And somebody told me about you. And the first story I heard was actually a crazy story, because I'll get into that a little bit later, but that was about you playing through 2 torn ACLs, which was, you're either a lunatic or the most ultimate team player of all time. But started learning about you. So I appreciate you being an inspiration to me and someone that I can look up to and emulate, hopefully.
Well, thank you. Those are great comments. I appreciate it.
So looking at you, though, so someone that you emulated and wanted to be like and learn a lot from was Bill Campbell when you were at West Point. Can you tell me a little bit about Bill Campbell?
Yeah, I got to know Bill later in life. He was someone that I met in Silicon Valley. He was affectionately known as the coach, as he was he was a mentor for many executives, and our paths crossed quite a bit over the decades of him giving mentorship to executives that I was calling on from a business standpoint. And I didn't really have a great sense of his background until the last couple of years of his life before he unfortunately passed away. But he stands for many of the great leadership traits that we were taught at West Point, and he taught those characteristics and leadership principles to the great leaders of some phenomenal technology companies. And while he didn't go to West Point, he definitely reflected many of the leadership principles that we were taught and built the foundation of many of our great leaders and graduates.
What were some of the biggest lessons that you learned from him?
I think the biggest thing I learned from Bill is the fact that you want to be really straightforward and to the point with feedback, and sugarcoating things or dancing around the bush, so to speak, wasn't going to get to the truth, and it wasn't going to solve the problem. It was better to be blunt and to the point about the realities of the feedback or the situation, and calling a spade a spade. So that was really differentiated, because a lot of leaders don't feel comfortable sharing feedback so directly with their teams because of just the how awkward it feels. And giving someone feedback, we talk about it, SoFi, as a gift, but it's an expensive gift. It's one that takes someone as a leader being willing to put themselves at risk to the relationship and being challenged with the feedback, but you have to give it. And if you want to be great, you have to be willing to change.
Another one of your mentors was Jim Young, who taught you about critical success factor. Can you talk a little bit about what critical success factor is?
Yeah, Coach Young, the first week that you're an Army football player as a freshman, I remember he brought us into an auditorium, and it was almost like a class. It had nothing to do with football. The topic was football, but it had everything to do with strategy and tactics. And he walked through what it took to be a successful football team, what our culture at West Point needed to be. in order for us to be successful. And then he boiled it down to 5 critical success factors that it took for us to build into what we did every day at practice and how we trained, so that on the football field on Saturday, we could win those 5 critical success factors. And they were driven by data, they're driven by analysis, and they also suited our unique strategy. So as an example, one of the first critical success factors was to get the first down. So when offense goes on the field, that's their first series. You got to get a first down in that first series because it does a couple of things. First and foremost, it gets you 4 more downs, which means at a minimum, you're going to have at least 5 plays or 7 plays, which will eat some of the clock up. It will also advance the ball. And if you do it every time, you advance the ball 10 yards. And then if you kick it, you're at some point going to flip the field where your opponent's got to go the entire length of the field to score. One of the second critical success factors, in addition to getting the first down every time you took the field, was to win time of possession. Because in theory, if you have the ball and the competitor doesn't have the ball, they can't score. And so that means your defense is resting. And our defense was generally undersized. And if we played it for 25 minutes or less, our defense performed really, really well in terms of total offensive yards given, turnovers created, points given up, et cetera. But if we played 35 minutes, 10 more minutes, every step we took was slower. Every time we reached, it wasn't as far. And every time we jumped, it wasn't as high. And so the energy that we brought to the field, the better tactics, the better reads, all those things that create better speed and better quickness, they dissipate pretty quickly. And so we needed to control time of possession. 1, we'll keep our defense on the bench. 2, it'll minimize how often the other team gets to score. And 3, again, it's changing the field position. And anyone that's studied the game of football in modern era, the further down the field you start in an offensive drive, the higher percentage you have of scoring, because it takes less plays to get into the end zone. And so there was, and I could go on, there's 3 others. And every week after we played the game on Monday, coach started with not what the score was, but how did we perform against the 5 critical success factors? Because that was what we had to train to do to win each game. And our offense and defensive schemes actually increased the odds of our success against those 5 critical success factors. But basically, they're things you have to do to win. I'll give a different analogy than football. Moneyball, which was a book that I read when I was at Goldman Sachs, talks about what's the most critical success factor in baseball, and what should general managers be willing to pay the most for in a baseball player. And a lot of people will think it's home runs or batting average, and it's not. Statistically, the thing that's the most valuable, that leads to the most success for a baseball team, is on base percentage. And it makes complete sense. You can't score runs unless you get on base. And the more people that get on base, the more probability you have of scoring. And at the end of the day, that's the most critical success factor. So pay the most for the best critical success factor, which is on base percentage, not batting average, and not slugging percentage.
How have you been able to utilize critical success factor into your business career?
Yeah, I'd say, every company, when I started at Goldman Sachs as an equity research analyst, my job was to analyze companies and come up with a point of view on whether their stock was a buy or sell. And it's sort of like being a sports analyst or a weather person. You have to predict some outcome. Well, you have to look at their strategy, you have to look at the technology, you have to look at the resources they have, their competencies, the competitive environment they're in, how they're differentiated versus the competitors, how they differentiate and go to market, what are their sustainable competitive advantages. And many of these companies were new, that weren't around for 30, 40, 50 years. Companies like Priceline.com or Amazon or eBay or Expedia or Travelocity. I covered the internet sector. And it was really hard to look at history to understand who's going to win in the auction space, or who's going to win in the online retailing space or online media space or online travel space. So I developed critical success factors. In the auction space, the critical success factor, the equivalent of first down or on base percentage, was conversion rate. The higher conversion rate the auctions had on eBay or any other place, the more success a seller would have, but it's also more success the buyer would have. And the higher the conversion rate, the more people would be willing to buy that product, and therefore the higher price there would be. So the sellers makes more money if there's a higher price. So they'll want to put more supply. Well, more supply attracts more consumers, and that also helps drive more demand and drives pricing and the conversion rate of the auction actual happening. Because you got to clear the price the seller's willing to sell at, and it's a bidding war. But if the bid never gets above the price they want to sell at, no sell happens. The consumer's not
Yeah.
happy, the seller's not happy. So conversion rate's the critical success factor. For online search, the critical success factor was click-through rate. Someone clicks on a search result, it means it was relevant. The more clicks, the more relevancy, the better the data that you get for more usage. That data could then be re-engineered into the product to make the search results more relevant, which drives more click-through rate. So every company I look at, I think about critical success factors.
What do you think gave you this competitive thought process? Do you think that this was something that was innate or something that was taught to you throughout the years?
I mean, I definitely think I benefited from growing up in a competitive environment. When I was young and my parents got divorced, the first place I remember living is a place called Heritage Gardens in the city of Poughkeepsie. And it was a pretty rough neighborhood, and we had a pretty diverse neighborhood of different races and different ethnic backgrounds. And every day there was athletics, being played somewhere, whether it was basketball or softball or tackle football without pads. And so I grew up every day coming home from school and playing some type of sport, and it was always survival of the fittest, and who was the toughest and who's the most athletic. But I also think I grew up in a very competitive family. My mom, no one's tougher than my mom. I was watching a video of Duke basketball. I'm a huge fan of Coach K, given he went to West Point and what he's built at Duke for a basketball program. And he said, "No one's tougher than your mother." And he said that to his players. And he said, "Be as tough as your mom." And it's great advice. It's so true. My mom coached my little league baseball team. She fired her baseball coach because he was so bad and took over the team. So I learned a lot from my mom, and my older brother and a younger brother, very, very competitive. And then I benefited from going to a middle school and becoming great friends with 4 or 5 of the best athletes in the school. One played professional baseball, one played professional hockey, one did really well in college baseball. One went to the Olympics. And so I grew up in a very competitive school district where people wanted to be the best at what they did. So I benefited from all those things, but I think the thing that made me the most competitive was when I went to prep school and met a close friend, Otto Leone, who was a recruited quarterback, which I was as well, and we both got moved to halfback. And Otto was probably like 175 or 80 pounds, and at the time I was probably 210 pounds, and we were lifting weights because we both played halfback, so we were lifting partners. And we sat down to do the military press behind our neck, and I went first, and I don't know what the weight was, and then Otto went second, and he put on like 3 times the amount of weight. And he started military press, and I was like, "What the hell? What? You were a quarterback in high school. Where did you learn to lift so much weight?" And he grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that was more competitive than Poughkeepsie, New York. And before you knew it, I became even more competitive, and it just built on itself. And John Robb's another great football player, and I have many friends that each one was more competitive than the next. So we stand on each other's shoulders.
I mean, you were a complete team player. Like, I mean, you were one gritty dude. You tore both your ACLs and then played the entire season. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it was kind of a freak thing. I was when I went from prep school to West Point, I got switched to fullback, and my freshman year and the fall of my sophomore year, I played fullback. And back then, spring practice was 20 padded practices. It was more than 20 practices,
That's crazy. Jeez.
20 practices and pads. And about halfway through the padded practices, Coach Young walked up to me, and at that point, Coach Young probably talked to me twice in 2 years during my annual review, and he said, "Hey, we want to try you at linebacker. All our linebackers are hurt, and we think you could be a pretty good linebacker." And I said, "Coach, I actually asked to play linebacker when I came for the prep school, and you guys made me play fullback. And I lettered as a sophomore. I'm second, third string now, and I'll play a lot." And he said, "No, I know." He was like, "Let's move you to linebacker, and after a week or two, if it's not going well, we'll move you back to fullback, and you'll be right back where you were." So I said, "Okay, fine, I'll give it a shot." And never really played defense in my life in high school as a quarterback. And so I switched to inside linebacker, and within 4 or 5 practices, I was starting. It just came very natural to me. I was an offensive person most of my life, and knew all the different offenses from having played scout team, but also having been a quarterback. And I was starting in the spring game about 2 weeks later, and had a great first half. I had something like I remember very specifically, coaches like, you had 13 tackles in the first half. You're in great shape. And my dad just showed up, and my stepfather to watch, and he missed the first half. And I said, Coach, can I just play 1 or 2 more series in the second half? My dad just got here and he hasn't seen me play linebacker. And coach is like, okay, but one series. And sure enough, it was one series too much. The quarterback sprinted out, and back then, when we were in the option, we had a play called, I think it was Rambo, where the quarterback would sprint out and it looked like it was a pass, but it was a run. And because I used to play offense, I could recognize the play,
Yeah.
even though I didn't know what it was. And so I still had to drop back into coverage, and I came sprinting up really hard. I was about to lay out the quarterback because I knew he was not going to pass. And just before I hit him, one of the halfbacks clipped me from the outside coming in into my left knee. And just as he did that, I was about to hit the quarterback, and I had no stability, and the quarterback hit me, and so my right knee buckled. So both my knees literally came out. I could feel them come out, and I hit the turf. And anyway, I got we didn't have MRIs then, and so the doctor said, we'll scope your left knee, which looks worse than your right knee. And if the ACL and stuff is gone, we'll just bandage it up, and then we'll scope your right knee, and then we'll figure out where to go from there. So when when I woke up the next, that after the surgery, I checked my
Yeah.
knees, and sure enough, both had bandages. And the doctor said, you blew out both your ACLs, you also blew out your MCL, and you have meniscus tears. Why don't you stay here this summer and rehab, and then we'll do the surgeries. We have to do surgeries on both. You can't play like this, and we'll do it in the fall. And so I stayed there that summer with a guy named O'Neal Miller, who blew out his knee the same day. Who was a phenomenal football player. And he and I worked out the whole summer. And when everyone came back in August, I was playing 7-on-7 pass coverage with 2 Lenox Hill braces on. And I felt like I could play without having the surgeries. And the doctor said that was impossible. And I said, well, maybe I made my muscles strong enough that I don't need the ligaments, and my knees are different. And he said, they're not different. They're gonna slip out. And O'Neal and I both told him we wanted to play without having surgery. And I made it through my junior year, and then my senior year, I started all 11 games, had a great year, and a bunch of surgeries along the way until I got them reconstructed that spring of my senior year.
I mean, you're a relatively young person, and you've had your body's pretty beaten. I mean, you've had a dozen surgeries. You even confidently wear a neck brace on planes, and yet you say you would do it all over again. You would go to West Point, you'd play football, and you do it the exact same way. Why is that?
It's one of those things. I mean, I love to compete. I loved, football. I loved ice hockey. I played baseball. I rode crew. I love being challenged. And, West Point took that to another level academically, athletically, from a military standpoint. My closest friends in the world are guys I played football with, and it's a brotherhood that lasts forever, and that's invaluable. It's priceless. I learned how to lead in ways I still apply to today, and I don't think I would have, been able to do that not having been at West Point. So it's not just football; it's the academy overall. It's the people we meet, and the lessons that we're taught. And I think it's an incredible institution that gives you more than an academic education. It prepares you for life, and the things you learn endure for life. So do I love that my knees hurt and my neck is, fused and all? No, I don't love it, but it's a small price to pay. I couldn't have ever imagined have gotten to this point in life, and 5 children, a great wife, and successful professional career by a lot of measures. So it was well worth it.
So currently 4 banks make up about 2 trillion in market cap, and SoFi right now makes about 8 to 10 billion. So when I think of that, I think Nick Saban versus Coach Monken, Army versus Alabama. I mean, this is you're playing against top SEC teams and your Army football. How are you competing, or how do you plan to beat Nick Saban and the Alabamas of the banking industry?
There's more insights in that question than you'd ever imagine. A lot of people know this, but we played against Alabama when I was a cadet, and we lost by a point in the Sun Bowl. And I was fortunate enough as a sophomore to play on special teams in that game, and I swore we'd never lose a game or in life by 1 point again. That we'll find a way to win that last bit.
So now it's Coach Noto versus Coach Jamie Dimon, and we're facing off.
Well, you said it, not me. I wake up every day glad I'm David, not Goliath. It's more motivating. It's more inspiring. It drives me more. So I love being the underdog. But similar to your analogy, Army versus Alabama, you have to have an offensive defensive scheme and strategy that leverages your strengths and minimizes your weaknesses. And Army runs the option because it does really kill the clock. It maximizes time of possession, and it's a very grinding offense that benefits from disciplined players that can take the right angles, that understand strategy, and can survive on 3 yards at a time and never get off track. And similarly, the defense benefits from that offense, and it's the combination of those two things that allow Army to beat teams by minimizing their time of possession and maximizing their turnovers, et cetera. For us to compete with these other banks, we have to have a scheme that leverages our strengths. And so we have a strategy that allows SoFi to be more profitable on a per person and per account basis than a big company. And that's because we're a digital company. We've architected our products in such a way that they're much, much more efficient. We've also created a product that's mobilely driven. So there's a higher level of engagement, which gives us more data that we can use to better meet their needs. And if we can better meet their needs, they'll use more products from us. So we have lower cost per person, lower cost per product, and then we're driving more revenue per person and more revenue per product because of how we've architected our offense and defense. And for us, it's all the operating elements of our company brought together in what we call the financial services productivity loop. We win because we leverage that strategy of the FSPL, and embedded in that strategy are a bunch of critical success factors, just like the offense complemented the defense at Army, and just like the offense and defense leveraged the strengths of the players at West Point and minimized their weaknesses. And we've done the same thing so that we can compete with the big banks on a per person and per loan basis.
So I mean, besides, I mean, obviously you have many lofty goals, but one in particular is that you are actually very passionate and mean it when you say that you want SoFi to have the best culture out of any company. How do you plan on doing that? And you're not joking. I mean, I think you genuinely mean that.
No, I mean it. I know that we're far from it. And sometimes people misconstrue when I say that it implies that we're there today. We're not there today. It's our aspiration to get there. If it's a 9-inning game, we're in inning 2. But the first element of it is a foundation that we call our core values. We have 11 core values. They're meant to set the expectation of how we expect our teams to work together, our leaders to lead, our people to follow. They build the fabric and DNA of what we expect from each other. Then on top of that, we have to hold people accountable to it. We have to communicate it clearly. We have to lead by example, and we have to hold people accountable, because having a great culture doesn't take a unique technology or unique capital resources or a unique scale. It takes alignment, which we have. It takes leadership, and it takes accountability. So that's what we're focused on, and we're embedding it into everything we do. It's on our screens. I can see our 11 core values right now. It's how we celebrate successes each week at our company, all hands, and it's how we reward people.
Three of your core principles that I've heard you state kind of throughout your entire career is the fact that you want people to work hard, do the right thing, and take care of others. Why are those 3 things so core to you personally?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day that you can drive success by being unethical, but I don't want to be part of an organization that drives success unethically. And so you have to do the right thing, and you'll be rewarded, I think, both from the accomplishments that you have, but having done it the right way. Individual success is never as great as team success. And so let's bring other people along with us, so help other people. And if you're going to do something, why not give it everything you have? Why not work as hard as you can? Why not put everything you have into it and go after it passionately? Because the odds of success are very low. why make them lower by not putting forth the complete effort that you possibly can?
So you helped Twitter, shifting a little bit about innovation, go public, and then you led Twitter very successfully for several years. How did you incentivize creativity and innovation while you were there?
Twitter's got a very, very unique culture. It is definitely a company that relies on teamwork and relies on alignment. I had the benefit of working with, two great leaders. Dick Costolo was CEO when I first arrived, and then Jack Dorsey took over. And I think they both put a huge premium on teamwork and on collaboration, on ensuring that we bring each other along to set the plan and then go off and execute. Twitter's one of those things where the product is so valuable. It didn't have to be perfect for people to use it, but it got to the point where all those that were incredibly motivated to use it had sort of been acquired, and then to get to the next cohort of potential users, people that are not willing to do anything to use the product, the mass market, it had to continue to get refined and innovate to get there. And our decision to go after live streaming video was a way to appeal to the mass market. And while I don't think you could put quantitatively on paper the impact that live streaming video had, I think it made the product more understandable by the mass market on why they should use it. Where up until that point, the mass market didn't really appreciate what Twitter was at its core, the place to see what's happening in the world. Well, if you said to someone that had never downloaded the product, hey, use Twitter, see what's happening in the world, and they're like, okay, that sounds good. And then they open up Twitter and they try to see what's happening in the world, and it's a blank piece of, there's nothing there. You have to follow people. Well, how do you explain that to somebody? Because they're used to turning on the television and there's something there. They're used to going online and there's something there, and there was nothing here. So, live video was a way to communicate there is going to be something there. And when they get there, they see the live video, whether it's a football game or award show like the Academy Awards red carpet, there's tweets below it, and it made the product become more understandable and more familiar. And that would have never happened without the vision of Jack wanting to embrace being the fastest place to deliver what's happening in the world, and without the product and engineering team bringing it to life, and without the content team going out and winning deals against, again, bigger companies like Amazon and YouTube and Google and Apple, et cetera. So it was a great time, and it took us a long time to get the ship, in the right direction. But, at the end, it all came together.
Jack Dorsey is probably a lot different than the leaders that you met in your military career and probably the rest of your career, but for Twitter. What did you learn from Jack?
So I learned a ton from Jack. He's a great friend. Prior to COVID, we try to do dinner once a quarter, and so I'm still learning from him. I told him this at one of our first dinners after I left. I said, Jack, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate you so much more now that I'm gone than when I was at Twitter. And he looked at me kind of like, what do you mean? And I said, I have people at SoFi that are to me what I was to you. And I just want to thank you for listening to me, for being patient, for being a partner to me, and not throwing me out the door. And he's like, still look. I'm like, listen, I have people that work for me. They're like, hey, you got to do this, Anthony. You got to do that, Anthony. Or this person doesn't know what they're doing. You got to fire this person. You got to hire that person. Like, I realize what it's like to be the CEO now. Everyone's telling you what to do and demanding that you do it so that they can get done what they want to get done. And you just can't react to that. You can't take what they say as gospel and go execute it. Otherwise, you'd be firing everyone at the company, and we'd be going in 15 different directions. And being able to listen to all of that, absorb it, not getting excited, being calm and asking questions, and being there for the person so they feel like you're listening, and you are, but not then taking action unknowingly. So, patience is definitely something you learn as a CEO. And so every day something happens, and I think back at a point in my life and I'm like, now I know why Jack did that, or that was very wise of him. And it's just true. And people will say that about being a head football coach. They're like, they don't really understand what it is to be a coach and the head guy until you're the head guy. And then when you are, you realize who the good assistants are and who aren't the good assistants. And similarly in business, I have a completely different view of great leadership now than I ever have in my entire life, that I'm a CEO. And so I learned a lot from Jack, having worked for him, but I've learned even more not working from him and being in the same shoes he was in.
How has your view on leadership changed now that you're the CEO of a major company?
I'd say my leadership has changed more in the last 3 years than in the prior years. And I really, this will sound arrogant, but I came into this job thinking I'm a great leader, and I still think I'm a really good leader, but I've made more improvements in the last 3.5 years than I have in the last 20, because being the person that's ultimately in charge has just a different impact on the organization. And every decision you make is an important decision. There's
Right.
not a decision that you make that doesn't impact somebody negatively and someone else positively, or have consequences to it that if you're wrong, they're significant and they have an impact. I definitely listen more. I think I grew up with an attitude that everyone had to be a top performer. And if you weren't, we were going to explain what needed to be done. And you either got it done or you were gone. You can't do that as a CEO. Not everyone's the A+ player. Like, everyone has a different role. And if everyone was A+, there wouldn't be enough roles for everybody. That doesn't mean we purposely have people that are C's or B's. It means there's a place at our company for someone that's not A+.
Right.
And that person has to be treated equally in every dimension, every respect, as the A+ player. And up until this point in my career, you could get away with not doing that. And so when you have an underperformer, I can't show people I know the person's an underperformer, but I have to coach that person behind the scenes. I have to help that person behind the scenes, because they need to be credible. They need to have the
Yeah.
respect of the organization because they're still responsible. And so that's just one example. Another one that I like to talk about is we want to always get everyone's point of view, a complete perspective, and not make a decision until we have all the points of view. And when you're young in your career, it's easy to say, I know the answer, then go get the data to support the answer. But when you're the CEO, that last piece of information you could get could be the most critical, and you may not get it to the last minute of the last day. And so that's another example.
What would you tell people? Because it's easy, especially like in my position right now, it's very easy to look up at leadership and say, "Oh, they're idiots. They should have done it this way." Because obviously, that is coming from a place of ignorance and obviously not enough information. So it's easier to make decisions. What would you say to people like me and other young people where it's you're looking up and everything seems super simple? Can you shed some light on the perspective now that you're in the position where you are the decision maker?
Yeah, I'd say the first thing is assume good. Assume that everyone that you're looking up at is smarter than you, more experienced than you, more intelligent than you. And then say, if I assume all of those things and they drew a different answer than I would have drawn, why?
Right.
Maybe they didn't have all the information, or that I have. Maybe I have something that they don't have. So maybe they don't have complete information. Or maybe they have a constraint that I'm not aware of. Or maybe there's another set of decisions they have to make. And in totality, those other decisions are more important than this decision. And they're playing a portfolio as opposed to just one individual decision. There's a logical explanation when smart people that are hardworking, that are in positions of leadership, when they make decisions that are completely different than what you think, and you think you have those same three characteristics, there's more to the story.
Yeah.
And I think the key when you look up and see those things is try to learn, ask questions, don't assume, ask questions about what else is it that could have caused this decision to be made, because it doesn't seem logical from where I sit. And that's the reason why it doesn't feel logical, is because you don't have the information that makes it logical. Go out and
Right.
seek that information.
So, but a component to that is transparency. So obviously within organizations, people ideally want to be transparent, and ideally they want systems to be somewhat meritocratic. But is that just lingo, or does that actually cross over into
No,
operations?
no, I mean, we have a saying that we need all the perspectives and all the data in order to get to the truth. And it's not that people are lying. It's what is the true picture of what we're trying to decide. And if
Right.
there are pieces of information that are left out, we don't have the truth, the true picture. So we're not saying about lying and being truthful. We're saying let's get the complete picture, because if we have the complete picture, we have a higher odds of success of making the right decision than if we don't have that complete picture. And so transparency is really key. Like, often in my career, I was I think, criticized for being too transparent, and maybe too blunt. And there's a way to say something two different ways where the same thing is communicated, but one is nicer and kinder than the other, and
Right.
that's a fair criticism. But not actually providing the real information. To me, that's just inefficiency and a lack of a commitment to excellence.
What would your advice to government and military be to create a more innovative culture and an environment that's more conducive to creativity and change?
I think you have to give people space to be creative, and challenge them to accomplish something new. I'll give you an example, and this relates to the military. There are a lot of things in the military that are time based, like
Right.
you have to deploy this amount of time, you have to be operational in this amount of time, you have to go from point A to point B in this amount of time.
Yeah.
And one of our differentiators is fast. We want to be the fastest place to apply for a loan and get funded for a loan, fastest place to buy a stock, sell a stock. So when I got here, I said, how long does it take from someone applying for a loan to getting funded for a loan in personal loans? Seven days. Okay, I
Right.
want to get it to 7 seconds. Sir, we can't get it to 7 seconds. It can only go to 3 days. Well, why is that? Well, here's why. Okay, I said, you know what? Let's get it to 3 days and then we'll worry about the other 3 days. And sure enough, we're down to 3 days.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, so what does it take to get down from here? And the team is challenged from a regulatory environment what we can do. But the movement from 7 to 3 wouldn't have happened if we didn't say we want it to be 7 seconds, right?
Right.
Like they're like, 7 days is fine. No, it's not. 7 seconds is the goal. So, give people the impossible that they think is impossible and try to convince them it is possible, and they will be creative to get there. And so I didn't give a roadmap or directive on how to get to 7 seconds. I just said it shouldn't take more than 7 seconds. It's a completely digital process. It's just a matter of creativity of how we get there. And moving from 7 to 2 days is not easy, but it took a lot of creativity, and the team understood that they would be rewarded for being creative. Otherwise, we wouldn't get to that amount of time. So in the military, I think setting those type of challenges to create precedents that are unprecedented is a way to drive creativity, and rewarding people for it.
How do you reward people? I mean, I hear this all the time, and I'm not sure how you do that in government to reward failure and also reward creativity or innovation, because you're graded on such a short time period that the majority of these things take time. So why would you assume that risk if you're only going to be negatively, rewarded for or punished for trying to take risk for the betterment of the organization in the long term?
Um, so it has to be a portfolio. Everything you
Right.
do, like if you set objectives, those objectives have to have some degree of failure in them. So we set objectives and key results. We call them OKRs.
Hmm.
And a successful outcome in OKR is if you achieve 70 to 80% of that outcome. So, for example, if our goal is to go from X number of members to Y number of members, if and let's so it's Y minus X is the delta. If they get to 80% of that number, that's success.
Right.
Which means Y minus X has to be aspirational to begin with. And we say that to the team. We want you to set a goal that you don't know how you're going to get there today. And you have to figure that out over the course of the time. And if the time's 90 days, you don't know how you're going to get from X to Y. You think you can get to X to 60% of it, and the rest you have to figure out. Okay, well, we're going to, an A on this test is an 80%. And so we're basically saying the highest grade is going to bake into it 20% failure, 20% shortfall. But the reality is people overcome that. They overcome that 20% and they close the gap and they get to 90. But if you never said to them, I want a goal that's 20% higher than you think you can achieve, then they would just set the goal at 80 and not be creative. They would just drive to that outcome. So you gotta design into the goals that an A is not 100%, an A is 80%. That's one way you do it. The second way is when people come up short. Let's just say they get to 60%. You don't say, why did you get to 60%?
Yeah.
Start with, okay, what did we learn?
Right.
Learn's a very positive term. It has positive connotations to it. What did we learn? And if the team has nothing that they've learned, then missing wasn't worth it,
Right.
right? There's nothing gained. And so there's a concept in Silicon Valley called failing fast.
Yeah.
Well, you don't want to just fail fast. You want to learn fast. And if you learn fast, you can iterate fast. And if you can iterate fast, you'll innovate. And so one of our core values is learn, iterate, innovate. And so we want to fail fast and learn, then we iterate on that failure, and that eventually repeated and repeated becomes innovation. And the best example of this is the light bulb that I use is the light bulb. There's probably, I'm sure, better examples. How many times did the light bulb fail to light? How many filaments were changed? How many voltages were changed? Wires, like you can go on and on. But that's scientific experimentation. Okay, I tried this, it failed. I tried this, it failed. I tried this, it failed. And it's not until you fail 10,000 times that it actually lights up. And so failing is fine as long as it's a learning in every case that you learn what didn't work and why it didn't work, and that leads you to the next thing. And if you think about it, a light bulb today can last years.
Right.
And that's because it's continuing to be iteration on top of iteration on top of iteration.
So you've been a part of the Army, Wall Street, and Silicon Valley, three very different cultures. How has your perspective on failure and taking risk as well as innovating changed over those three very different cultures?
I definitely think in the Army, failure is binary, that it's a negative in every scenario I could think of. And I think that's unfortunate. I think that you're only as strong as your weakest link in a war. And if you have a culture where it's binary, then your weakest link's not going to get better, and you're going to have a big gap between the strongest and the weakest, which means you've diluted the overall strength of the military. And so a culture that allows for failure that can be iterated on so that the weakest link is stronger than it would otherwise be would make the military stronger. My time at Kraft Foods and at the NFL versus Wall Street, very different. Kraft, I learned, in my first job out of the military, I was a minority. I worked in the salad dressing category. I think I worked with, predominantly women. I think there were 2 men in the whole group out of, call it 15 people.
Yeah.
So I learned what it was like to be, a minority based on gender. I also learned what it was like to be in an environment where people talked about areas that I had very little interest in. It was food, it was salad dressing. And so, there was, it was both a gender difference, but also like a cultural difference. And I learned a lot about diversity in that experience, and it's invaluable. I also learned about business. My time with the NFL was during a really tough economic time. It was during the financial crisis. So 2008, 9, and 10. And I learned a lot about, quite frankly, politics, and not politics in a negative sense, but our government has Republicans and Democrats. There's 2 parties. And I have not been a student of government at all, or politics. And my family background didn't lend itself to that. And being in the military didn't lend itself to that. And when I got to the NFL, the biggest surprise to me was it was a organization like our government. And the analogy was there was Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah.
On the NFL, there are large teams and small teams, large city teams and small city teams. And the large city teams were like Republicans and the small city teams were like Democrats. And they had ideological views economically and policy that reflected their economic status in the league. And so when you wanted to get a bill passed, you wanted to get a stadium approved,
Right.
you had to get 24 of 48 votes. I'm sorry, 24 of 32 votes. Well, there's about half and half. And so I had to get people to cross the aisle. So I learned a lot about what it would be like being the Treasury Secretary. So not just the CFO, but also the Treasury Secretary. And Roger, the commissioner, like he's a CEO, but he's also the president of the United States, and that he's got to, bridge the aisle. And so that was a very different experience. And then Wall Street's the most competitive, industry in the world. And I love that competitive nature to it.
So you talked a little bit about diversity and obviously being one of the few males in the salad dressing category. At SoFi, your mission is to deliver products to every type of person, man, woman, any economic, it just doesn't matter. But with that, you're trying to serve a very diverse population. How have you, or is it important to create a very diverse organization that is then serving them? And how have you been able to do that? And why is that so important?
Yeah, one of our core values is to embrace diversity and make sure everyone feels welcomed and everyone has a voice. We have to serve society, and we have to have a company that has that same diversity of society, not just race and gender, but also economic status and education and age and areas of interest and goals. And so our company absolutely has to be diverse to better serve society, but also we need diversity of thought to make the best decisions,
Yeah.
and it provides a different perspective. So it's something that we've set as a priority, and one that's critical. And our number one priority for this year is to build a durable culture of diversity and a place
Mhm.
people love to work. And we've elevated it to that level.
Why does diversity of thought lead to such successful organizations?
Because it helps you make the best decisions. It does make it harder. If you have groupthink, you can make decisions pretty quickly.
Right.
But if you have diversity of thought, it causes you to look at things from more angles and more considerations. And that process and debating is really important to making sure you've considered everything you can.
So a little bit back to SoFi and why you joined. I mean, you were obviously doing very well at Twitter. You were leading Twitter as their CEO, COO, making a ton of money, doing a great job, and yet you left to assume a lot of risk and join a startup. Why did you do that?
When I first got the call about SoFi, I said I wasn't interested. I didn't really know what the company did, and things had just started to go really well at Twitter, the best that had been going. And I was really having fun for the first time in 4 years there with things in the right direction. And the recruiter called back a couple times and said, "There's investors that are on the board. They're offended you won't even talk to the company." And so I asked the recruiter for information on it, and I would talk to him. And as I dug into it, it was almost as if like someone was taking care of me from above to take a look at it and to really get into it. And as I started to dig
Yeah.
into it more and more, I got more excited about the possibility of having an impact on people's lives. And we focus on high earners, not well served, so people with $100,000 of annual household income or more. And people's reaction may be just you're trying to help people that are above average. Yeah, the reason why we're trying to help people above average is they're overachievers, but they're not getting to their goals. They're
Right.
not getting to the American dream. And how is it possible today that you could go to a great college and had worked your ass off to get to that college? You got great grades, you got a great job, and you're making $200,000 a year, and you can't afford a house in a city you want to live in,
Right.
and then you can't afford to have as many children you want to have, or take as many vacations as you want to take, or retire when you want. And the American dream sort of got crushed by just a complete bifurcation of the economic status in the United States. And so we're trying to help people that are above average achievers reach the goals that they should have otherwise been able to get to economically, so they can have the life that they want. And we call that having enough money to do what they want. So I became really passionate about that. And we want to hopefully serve everyone at some
Yeah.
point. This is the core group we're starting with. And so I saw that as a unique challenge. And the second thing is the financial services industry, unlike the travel industry, the retail industry, the media industry, hadn't been disrupted and innovated the way Amazon had, or Priceline had, or so many of these
Right.
other companies. And I saw the benefit of the last 20 years of my career. I had a front row seat to those industries and what happened to the
Yeah.
Netflixes and the Amazons, and I want to do that in finance.
What do you think you learned about all these major companies just disrupting the world? I mean, you started kind of when internet was booming at Goldman Sachs, and you kind of have been on this roller coaster since, and you've seen all these companies kind of fail, as well as some of these companies just rise to unbelievable levels. What have you learned from all those different stories?
Well, it ties back to what we were talking about when we started it, about the different types of strategies and approaches to driving competitive advantage, to figuring out what the critical success factors are. And then against those critical success factors, how are you going to organize the company to have an unfair advantage? And every industry, there's been a winner take most. In
Right.
some, there have been a winner take all. And seeing that fight to be the winner take most in all these different industries has been incredibly beneficial. I like to say I've had a front row seat to the greatest, movie in history,
Yeah.
the industrial commercialization of the internet, and then commercialization of mobile and now data. So I learned a lot about strategy. I learned a lot about organizational design, a lot about financing, a lot about M&A. One of the least appreciated elements of value creation is mergers and acquisitions. eBay did an acquisition that changed the fate of their company versus everyone else's. They bought PayPal. Now, it may not seem like PayPal's that strategic, but remember to what I said before about conversion rates.
Yeah.
Well, the auction conversion rate is going to be a lot higher if you have a seamless payment capability like PayPal integrated seamlessly. People will have more confidence to pay a higher price because they know they'll get the product and there's some type of system embedded in there. And that was a great acquisition. Priceline bought a company called bookings.com for about $150 million. Well, the entire company is called bookings.com now because they went from $1 stock to $1,500 stock. Google bought YouTube for $1 billion. It's worth tens of billion dollars today. And I can go on and on and on of how acquisitions have played such an important role. I got to see those things happen as they were happening. And I was there to witness people say they were bad deals. And I was there to see the management team stand up and say, and express their conviction on why they did it. We bought a company about a year ago called Galileo Technologies, a payment platform. It's fundamentally changed the value of our company. It's changed the strategic significance of our company, our competitive advantages. Well, I bought that company in March of 2020. And if you go back and look at the performance of the stock market in March of 2020, it was down 10% every day for a couple of days, then up 10%.
Yeah.
And so we did an acquisition during the beginning of COVID. It was all done on Zoom. We never left our houses, let alone went to the office. And we did an acquisition for $1.2 billion, which was about a quarter to a third of our company at the time. And our company is now worth, 4 times that amount. I wouldn't have had the confidence to do that deal, understood the strategic importance of that deal, being willing to fight through the uncertainty.
Yeah.
My board's like, you're crazy doing a deal in the middle of this. Why don't we just wait till it's done? And I said, if what the world we're living in stays like this, you'll have wanted to have done this deal twice as much as we're doing it. So I wouldn't have had the conviction to do that if I hadn't seen all those other deals done throughout time.
What have you and other CEOs probably taken away from this COVID-19 experience that we're in right now?
Whatever you think is going to happen is not going to happen. I mean, that's been the theme. In March of 2020, Airbnb was laying off people. Any travel company was, cutting costs. Financial services companies like SoFi, we stopped lending money to people. And then before you knew it, we were having a record fourth quarter, a record third quarter. So, how do you go from a world where, oh my Lord, the economy is going to crater, it's Armageddon, to having record quarters not even 6 months later and being in a position to do that? And so there's a lot in between all of that, but I would just say, think about all of the ranges of outcomes, plan for each one of those range of outcomes, and then run where the light is. And I'm pretty confident every CEO, whatever they thought was going to happen and they talked to their board about in March, did not happen by time you went through one full year. Something else happened. And having that nimbleness, I'll say this, like, if you'd asked me, in December of 19, can your company work from home in 3 days, everyone work from home, and you're going to have a record year, you're going to buy a company that's worth a quarter of your company, then you're going to file for a bank license, and then you're going to file to go public through a SPAC merger. I would have said, we couldn't do the first thing. And here we are, and have been working from home the entire time and accomplished all of that. I wouldn't even have known to ask somebody those questions because it'd be so improbable that could happen. And it's like that for, Airbnb's public now, and I can go on and on about other companies. So whatever people thought was going to happen didn't happen. And what we were taught at West Point was incredibly valuable, which is have a plan. As things transpire, go to your alternative plans. What's your alternative course of action, and execute.
I think obviously you're familiar with GameStop and AMC. I mean, the culture of finances seems to be changing, because I think the average person realizes that if they band together, they have some form of power in this kind of age of Reddit. And I'm sure a lot of Wall Streeters were probably going insane and confused, and every economist is saying this doesn't make sense. How is the game of finance changing, and the world as a whole?
Yeah, I think we're going through what other industries went through in the 90s and the first part of the 2000s. And that's a lot of capital coming into the space, a lot of investment in innovation, fragmentation of services. And I think we'll go through consolidation, and we'll go through a time period where 4 to 5 companies emerge as clear leaders in fintech. I think SoFi will be the leader of those 4 or 5. No one else has been able to do what we're doing, which is a one-stop shop for all of your financial needs across your lifespan, and we'll continue to add more and more there and be a true relationship. So, I think it's a really interesting time, and we're about to see a multi-decades of compounding growth for these innovative companies. So it's exciting.
Now, get it. I mean, you've had lofty goals and crazy work weeks since you left the Army, 60 to 90-hour work weeks. But one amazing thing about you is that you have an amazing family, and you've somehow been able to balance this and be a great husband and father. How have you been able to create balance in your life?
I'm not sure I could say I've created balance. I think I've benefited from having my best friend as my wife, Kristen. I mean, we've known each other since we were 12, and we're incredibly in love, and been together for almost 30 years marriage, and longer than that from a relationship standpoint. And I'd say that's probably the most, when we talked about critical success factors, I'd say that's mine, without a doubt. She's the glue that keeps us together and helps me stay sane and make sure our kids are taken care of, and we're one tight family. So I definitely can't say that I've been balanced my entire life, but the
Yeah.
periods where I've been the least balanced, she's been there to get me back on track. So I'd attribute all that to her.
So obviously, no one day is the same. But can you walk us through some of your maybe routines or daily habits that you've used throughout your life or developed over time that have helped lead to some of your success?
Sorry, say that again. You broke up.
So some of your daily habits. So obviously, no one day is the same. But can you talk through maybe some of your daily habits or routines that you've developed over time that have helped lead to some of your success?
Yeah, I'd say there's not like a routine that I have or daily habit that has led to my success, other than get up early and go to bed late. Even when I was a cadet, I burned the midnight oil. An extra hour of homework every night times 5 nights is 5 hours more than someone else. And
Right.
I would say, as sad as it is to boil it down to something like that, I think I've worked more hours than other people. And if there's anything I can contribute to a routine to success, I'd say that.
Well, I'll finish you off with a few more questions that I have for you. But I mean, one of the biggest ones is that this has been a foundation to you, and that's obviously character. Why is character so important to great humans and leaders?
Yeah, I think it's the bond that creates trust, and trust is critical to anything we do because there's no certainties.
So, last question for you, and obviously this is an important one for what we're trying to do, and that's what is your biggest piece of advice to a 22-year-old that's getting ready to graduate and tackle a life with lofty goals and strong ambition?
Yeah, I would say the 3 things that you mentioned before, which is, work as hard as you can, take care of other people, and do the right thing. And I think if you do those 3 things, you'll be incredibly successful.
Well, Mr. Noto, I can't thank you enough for taking this time to be with leaders of character and help influence the next generation of leaders. You are an awesome human being and a great leader, and it's an honor to be at the same institution that you graduated from and learn from you today.
Well, Max, it's my pleasure. Thanks. It was an honor to be on, and I wish you guys all great success and luck as we navigate the next couple of months and through graduation and off into the Army. So thank you.
Yes, sir. Look forward to talking again
Take care.
soon.
Take
See you,
care.
sir.
Bye-bye.